Hey everyone, what a crazy week last week with everything on coronavirus and Bitcoin. I'm here again with Matt from last week, and we're here to talk about some of the setups going into March now for cryptocurrency. So, one of the things we wanted to go over from last week was how much follow through some of our setups ended up getting, and the obvious one I wanted to go over first would be Ethereum, because we had that kind of daily equilibrium building, and we had that bear break follow through, which was pretty great. So we had this level here. It was $237.41. That was on watch for the support of this equilibrium. We said that if this level 245.34 broke, that would also be a red flag. And so that level broke quickly after 237.41 broke. And from breaking that level all the way down to the bottom here, we dropped about 11%. So that just goes to show you that, again, these equilibrium patterns, that tightening rubber band that we went over last week, those patterns can really mean a lot in terms of follow through. If you were, let's say, risky enough to take a short, it might have been oversold on shorter time frames here. You would have probably been able to get out with a profit no matter what, as even on the bounce, we barely went up to test that 237 level. We topped out around $238.30.
So really you had a reload if you missed that initial entry because things were too oversold on the shorter term time frames. You had a back test to that level, and you'll see that oftentimes on breaks of key levels.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were a bear and you missed your initial entry, that price, former support, became resistance on the bounce. That's where people were looking to sell into on that initial back test.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, actually on our Twitter, I actually posted my entry because I believe it was on the hourly or the 4 hour time frame when we were down at about 210. I was saying, okay, we're pretty oversold. It's very close to that $200 psychological level. My bet is that we're not going to go down and immediately smash through that, considering how strong we were on the uptrend here. So I posted an entry around $211. And then I posted my exit around 235 because I thought as well, this level, potential level for backtest for bears, probably going to be some profit taking there as well. So yeah, if you also want to see our entries, I don't know about Matt, but I will be posting mine on the Kinetic Crypto. I know, Matt, you're not huge into crypto trading like all the time, but I think, every now and then I'll be posting setups, so you can follow us there.
Very good. And I think that was a good entry because I'm pretty sure if we go back to last week's video, this
Hmm.
was my line in the sand in terms of where we needed bulls to bounce. That's 213, and
Hmm.
we bounced off of 210.
Hmm.
Reason I think that level, it's a clearer pivot at these wicks here. This is probably, can't quite tell, but looks like an inside bar. But after that wick, there's nothing until really down here. So that was a key area, and bulls held that. So good stand by the Bulls where they needed to make that stand before a potential air gap on the
Hmm.
chart.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would go into this week's levels on Ethereum from here. I see basically three. I'd love to know if you see any others, but my big three are clearing that resistance here, which is a backtest of support of around 238.30. I'd love to see that break for the bulls if they want to get anywhere. 210, which is the low of the dump here. And then I think 200 psychological is the next major one to watch. However, if you really want to go down and figure out what the actual support is, there isn't a really clear daily support till 155.55. So if $200 doesn't hold, it can really waterfall down from here. The RSI, the relative strength index, is not that oversold, so we could easily drop under 200, drop down closer to 155, and it still wouldn't be that overextended to the downside. Matt, do you see any other levels maybe of note here?
238.30 is the key one for me
Mm-hmm.
for a bullish signal, but I'd even look at the high of yesterday, 227.89, which is the 4 hour lower high. If
Mm.
you're looking for sort of a really early signal on a potential reversal, this here would need to break before I'd even be interested. That will coincide with your 4 hour EMAs as well. We get
Mm-hmm.
above that, we treat that as support, and we're starting to look a little bit better for the next several days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll jump to S&P 500 in a little bit, but I do think that this dump has correlated to some extent with the overall stock market. I think there's a lot of people who are leveraged, and they take a little bit off just to have a bit of cash on the sidelines, so that their positions are a bit safer, so that they can buy the dip and things like that. And I do think that crypto, in some extent, was followed by that, because they do trade futures for cryptocurrency. I don't think Ethereum has futures live, but Bitcoin does. So people who are trading futures, might minimize their exposure to Bitcoin in order to get into other assets, or just to have some collateral on the side.
And that's a good point too, because we are seeing a scenario right now in the market where very well established companies are getting hit pretty hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the type of losses you see in a week that generally you would have to see over months and months to hit this type of percentage drawback.
Mm-hmm.
And we are looking at the monthly chart for a lot of these crypto coins. We're looking for monthly equilibriums and for supports to hold. And we have to keep in mind that if money is fleeing sort of the safer companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Apple and companies that have been around for decades and are very well established, there is potential that a speculative market like cryptocurrency could have some effect to that. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And not trying to sound doomsday or anything, but if money doesn't feel safe in the traditional market, we have to watch crypto. Is it going to be a safe haven? Is it going to be too risky in an otherwise poor investing environment in the greater or in the stock markets? We have to watch that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no indication one way or another yet.
Absolutely. So we'll go back to
Yeah.
Bitcoin here real quick. Bitcoin, similar deal. I wrote the drawdown here from that key level we talked about last week, 93.50. So once that level broke from the bottom of that support level to the top, we saw about a 10% drop, around $930. The
That
big
held up better than Ethereum, actually. I measured Ethereum's, it was 14%.
So there's two things I actually think are really interesting about this chart. I think in terms of the drop, I don't think Bitcoin was as bad. You're right. But the bounce on Bitcoin is a lot less impressive, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Bitcoin generally doesn't move as hard as Ethereum. So I think when you look at Ether, over this year, basically, it has done a good 40 to 50% better than Bitcoin. And on the drops, obviously, it's going to reflect some more volatility. I think the big problem here with Bitcoin is that we didn't even come close to retesting that level that was support. Now, mind you, it wasn't a daily equilibrium setup. It wasn't quite the same deal, but the bounces so far on Bitcoin have been a lot weaker. The relative strength index is in the 30s. It's a lot weaker than Ethereum at the moment. In terms of levels that I'm watching, I wrote down 89.71, so that's the top of the first bounce of the first day here. I'm watching 84.11, which is close to a bit of a double bottom here. We reached about 84.45 and 84.11. Double bottoms, essentially, it's like testing the same level but not seeing much follow through, which means there's some people buying in that region around 8400. So I'd like to see that hold once more. And then if 84.11 breaks, I'm looking down at the next cleared daily support, which is 82.38. Now that's not that that's not that far away. It's only about 2 to 3% away. Beyond that, you're just going down the time frames and really looking for your next support. So you got 82.38. The next one here is 76.72, and then 68.71. But what we are looking for on the weekly and on the monthly is that our monthly higher low is in. We definitely need 64.35 to hold. So this is an area where I think a lot of buyers are going to step in to try and protect this monthly level. So I would definitely keep an eye on the shorter term timeframes for any more established support on Bitcoin. See anything, Matt?
Again, I like the high of yesterday. It looks like that there was a little bit of a fake out. There was a big bull move that lasted maybe 30, 45 minutes and
Mm-hmm.
was snapped back down. Similar candle or similar upper wick, anyway, to Ethereum.
Mm-hmm.
Breaking that level would be an early sign, but still a long way to go. But that would show momentum for at least the coming 2 or 3 days, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
But
So
89.71, if you get that early level, that 87.50, it doesn't mean anything without 89.71
yeah,
breaking.
that's kind of the early signal. And then the other thing too to keep in mind is that Bitcoin is very clearly having the daily EMAs cross bearish.
Hmm.
This daily 12 EMA, like we talked about last week, could potentially become resistance, and that's right at 9,033. So, we would, if Bitcoin starts to bounce the next day, that daily EMA 12 is going to be around 9,000. That's going to be resistance. You're going to have that former bounce resistance there. It's going to be a tough level for bulls to kind of get over, um, definitely without some good momentum and volume behind it.
Yeah, and bulls are going to want to find a weekly higher low
Yeah,
sooner rather than later, because the more we trade sideways or the slower it is we go down, the slower being over more candles, we risk losing the bull cross of the 1226 on the weekly.
absolutely.
We
Yeah.
certainly want to keep that in a bullish formation here
Hmm.
and not take too long. I can't calculate or can't guess right now without more
Yeah.
analysis than we have time to do to figure out how many candles it would take for that to be at risk. But
Hmm. I mean, even
so
even now, it's not looking good that like we closed last week under both of those supports. This week, another close under the 12 and the 26 EMA in the weekly, which is 88.61 and 86.60. It wouldn't look too good for bulls to kind of hold that momentum that we kind of just formed here. It would also be one of the first times in history going back to Bitcoin. This chart doesn't go back that far back that we've had a weekly EMA cross that didn't really last that long. Almost every single time since about 2011 on the chart, I remember looking back on Bitcoin, these crosses have lasted for quite a long time. So it'll mean something that the bulls were not kind of able to hold this. Mind you, it is tied perhaps to a geopolitical event, but it is kind of important to watch for.
it could also be a scenario where, because we're looking for that tightening monthly range with our high, our low, our lower high now set, it could be that the EMAs become a little bit choppy on the weekly and the daily time frame
Yeah,
because of that larger monthly pattern. So
yeah,
keep that in mind too.
absolutely. And the monthly EMA 12 here is around 81.55. I don't really see that as a significant level here, as it didn't really hold to the downside, but that's just something to watch out for as well. Something a little bit different I want to take a look at here is Link Chain. This is a pretty popular altcoin that had an amazing run in 2019 from about 42 cents to about 450. And even in the last 3 weeks, had hit a new all-time high at about 486. So one of the things I'm looking at for this one, obviously, is that we are going to set a weekly high or low at some point. And then either depending on the strength of that, we're going to either go straight to a higher high or we're going to kind of do a weekly equilibrium. And it looks at this point, due to the magnitude of this bear volume, that we probably will just set a weekly lower high when this does top out. But what does look promising to me is these lower wicks, which is a signal of people kind of buying the dip on maybe the shorter daily time frame. If we zoom in here, I see 331 as a key level that the bulls have kind of bounced off of to create a nice little bounce here to the upside from 331 to 430, pretty significant bounce. And we're just pulling back here, looking for that daily higher low and either a daily equilibrium from here or a daily continuation to a higher high. The key levels that I would watch out for Link are 435. That's kind of the top of this bounce here. We got 331 as support, and then if that level breaks, we're looking back down at 267 as another key support. Matt, is there anything on Link Chain in particular you kind of have of note as well?
I would also look at this 313 level here, which is the low of this wick, just
Mm-hmm.
because we saw that on Ethereum come into play on the recent low, recent being the past few days. So
Right.
again, below that, there is that air pocket down to 267. This is a pretty big percentage move
Yeah.
between those two levels. So this would be certainly an area where if we do break down, I would expect a little bit of a fight there, and we'll see what the result of that battle is.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, just last real quick here, I want to just take a look at the S&P 500 because this is, we're not going to do a big stock review every week, but I think obviously what happened last week was pretty historic. One of the biggest drops in the S&P 500 in 1 week ever. I don't know if it was the biggest percentage-wise, but it was the biggest points-wise.
Certainly the fastest
Yeah, very
for that.
fast, like a lot of fear. And actually, right now, I don't have live futures data, but we are on recording this on a Sunday. I believe that we're somewhere in between the range of yesterday. I don't think we've broken the high or the low yet.
Close to, you moved. I think futures are stop moving. Right around here. I think we're trading sort of in that zone
Right.
there on futures, but
Yeah. So yeah, what I wanted to note here real quick, and it's not the best indication of you know, money or safe havens, is if you look at the low of the previous, like let's just say going back 2 Fridays ago to the low of last Friday, the S&P 500 dropped 14%. Bitcoin dropped 10%. So, you know, Bitcoin is not necessarily stronger in many ways compared to the S&P 500, but on the recent drop here, it's very rare that you will see a major index lose more than another correlated asset. Usually, if you dive into the S&P 500 stocks here, like XBI or XLK or some of the sectors, the individual sectors have lost a lot more um, than the actual full index. The other thing of note here on the S&P 500 is I believe if you count the dollar volume based on the volume of the shares traded, this was the largest volume week ever on the S&P 500. So that's pretty significant as well. And, you know, there's a lot of different reasons I think that we broke so heavily to the downside here on the S&P 500. I do think obviously like the kind of hysteria going on with the coronavirus is a big part of it. Manufacturing numbers are down. We're talking about another Fed rate cut. But the question is when do we peak out? When do the headlines of you know, these really unfortunate things like people catching the coronavirus or deaths, when do they kind of become overdone and ignored by the market? When do people start thinking, okay, this is the reality of the situation? It doesn't change how I think about, you know, companies and stocks and investments. And yeah, I'd love to kind of pass that question off to you, Matt. When do you think the hysteria kind of ends?
that's anybody's guess, really. And
Mm-hmm.
I think what we've seen in the equities market is we've seen an underreaction back in January when the coronavirus was starting to take hold in China, starting to spread elsewhere, and the market largely brushed off those fears. And it seems like that there is now a rush to price in the bad news we've had so far, as well as to try to price in future bad news. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really impossible to price in an unknown event. And that's why we're seeing sort of this reaction that we've seen last week. And you can see with very similar weekly candles on Bitcoin and the S&P 500 that there could potentially be money fleeing every sort of asset class.
Mm-hmm.
Gold had a pretty bad week as well. The dollar had a pretty bad week as well. Oil, natural gas had a pretty bad week as well. Nothing really had a good week last week.
No,
And
it's interesting.
that
Yeah.
is that is something we're going to have to keep an eye on. And it's possible that if this news does continue for weeks or months, it's possible that we could see Bitcoin testing those key monthly supports a little bit closer to them than we would otherwise expect them to. So
Yeah.
it's it's something we're going to have to take day by day. Who
Mm-hmm.
knows when the headline risk will subside, but right now there is significant headline risk if two bullish positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just real quick here, I don't want to dive super deep into it, but I want to think about the supply and demand chain for Bitcoin because it is a lot different from a lot of other elements in the economy. It is a speculative asset, but there is a market behind it, which is mining. And, you know, a lot of mining is done within China. But the thing that obviously makes mining different is it doesn't require a ton of people operating it in similar workplaces, right? People are not really being told to go home at mines because you'll have like a massive multi-thousand square foot facility and maybe like 4 people are working at it, right? Um, I don't know about the cost of energy. That's also a factor into the average cost that a Bitcoin is mined at. But as we approach this halvening kind of coming up in May, it's going to be interesting to see if the overall economy for Bitcoin is affected at all by the coronavirus. One of the hints that we saw as well, if we dove into Square, which is a company that you know, kind of does payment processing for small businesses, is they run a cash app, and they posted record Bitcoin buying in Q4, and I believe or not Q1 yet, Q4 of 2019. About 25% of all newly minted Bitcoins were sold through the Square app. And primarily the buyers of Bitcoin through that application are retail investors, not institutions. They're going to be buying in bulk. They're not going to be buying on a phone app. So it's just interesting to note that the demand factor for Bitcoin on some areas is steadily increasing. And I don't quite think the supply is going to be affected by the coronavirus, or if it is, not nearly as much as the upcoming halving. So it's just something to watch out for in the next few weeks as we approach that date.
There's a lot of funny, interesting events coming up for the cryptocurrency space. I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited for it. I have no idea how it'll play out, but Julian, you and I will take it one day at a time. We'll do these videos. We'll take it 1 week at a time for all of the Kinetic crypto fans. Do you guys
Yes.
have a nickname? Is it like Kinetic Cryptopians?
Kinetic Cryptopians, I like that.
All right,
I'll have to figure out something. But
sure.
yeah, we
Well,
will we'll go over it. I'm gonna make a video on the halving and kind of the thought process behind that, because it is something in the economics of Bitcoin that a lot of people don't quite understand, who are kind of newer to the scene, and why that was implemented and why such an arbitrary number and things like that. So yeah, it's
and
something
it's
that we'll
not a
go over for
concept we
sure.
have in the equities markets either.
Yeah, it's something that is very, very unique to Bitcoin. Be
So
imagine
I'm
just like
looking,
gold, just imagine half the gold just disappearing from
yeah,
the planet every like 4 years. It'd be kind of a pandemonium.
I'm looking forward to that video.
Yes, yeah, it should be a good one. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. All the levels will have been posted earlier in the video, and we'll catch everyone next week to see if those key bull levels can hold up, or if we have more coronavirus panic and we hit the downside a bit more. Awesome.
So good.
Talk to everyone later. Bye bye.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Yeah.